Let's kick off for those that have joined. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Barr, Enterprise Client Director here at Transparity. And a big thank you for joining us on this webinar, helping you take your data strategy from chaos to clarity. We've got some great speakers with us today. We're incredibly pleased to have to be joined by Jordan Lister, Director of Strategy and Insight at Astor Group. You'll also hear from Luke Collins, our Practice Group Director for Data here at Transparity. And we're delighted to have Enrique Aragao, Microsoft UK Head of Cloud and AI for the Enterprise Commercial team. They each bring real experience from different perspectives, so you'll get a clear and practical view of how organizations are approaching data, governance, and AI. As we go through the session, feel free to add comments or questions in the chat. We'll pick them up as we go, but we also have a dedicated Q&A section at the end. Before I hand over, a quick bit of context about Transparity. Across the Microsoft ecosystem, we hold all 6 advanced specializations covering modern work, Azure, security, biz apps, and of course, data and AI. These accreditations place us in the top 1% of Microsoft partners globally, and they mean we're trusted to deliver across every part of the Microsoft data and cloud ecosystem. It gives us real authority to talk about today's topic because we support organizations every stage of their data journey. Now with that, I'll hand over to Enrique to kick us off.
Wonderful, thank you, Steve, and welcome everyone. So I'm going to do a quick, sorry, wrong slides. I'm going to do a quick 10-minute framing of how we see the market evolving and how some organizations are addressing the challenge of data platform modernization. So this is a little bit of a mishmash of content that I delivered at the AI tour in London a few weeks ago, and also some recent announcements around the platform, which a lot of our customers are benefiting from. So let me just start with this. One of the things that is really grounding how we're looking at the market is that we believe that, when you think about models, when you think about the AI models that we're using, we believe that those are becoming more and more commoditized, right? So that's why on our platform at Microsoft, we offer more than 11,000 of them. What we believe is really creating differentiation is organizations that are combining intelligence and trust. What do we mean by that? So intelligence is really around how are we leveraging the intelligence around how work gets done in our organization, how our business operates, and how enterprise knowledge comes together, right? We believe that when you leverage that, that's what turns, smart models into truly intelligent systems. But also intelligence isn't enough, because at scale, what you need is trust. You need trust to accelerate the adoption of these systems, right? So that people actually use them. And organizations that are at the forefront of innovation, that are driving frontier transformation, they design trust in from the start. And they do that with a secure, compliant, and also observable foundation of data and systems, right? Which becomes the foundation beneath every agent that you end up building on top of that data. And so what we see now is that we're moving to a world where we're not just securing data, we're securing agents as well. And so when those two work together, that's when we see organizations really unlocking the full power of AI. And to bring that into a little bit more context, think about when you onboard an employee, right? You typically equip them with 3 buckets of context, right? Around how people work, so their teams, their roles, who collaborates with who, the workflows, but also how the business operates. So things like how the business is performing, the telemetry that you need, what is the actual state of the business? And then you also impart upon them institutional knowledge. What are the policies, the protocols, procedures, the documentation that they need to do their job? And so if you look at these 3 buckets, you realize that actually a lot of this might be fragmented in your organization today, because we've always relied on people to kind of piece it all together. And then when you think about agents coming into the picture, right, if employees and agents are going to work side by side, the agents also need those same 3 buckets of context, right? So that they can be accurate, so that they can be aligned with how the business runs. That's why we talk about this concept of a shared intelligence layer that spans organization, business state, and institutional knowledge. And when agents operate with this depth of information, that's when actions become more grounded, and it's really easier to govern that entire organization. And so as you hear me talk about data platform, this concept of your people, your agents, and your IQ, what here at Microsoft we're calling Microsoft IQ, is the end destination of why you should embark on a data modernization strategy, right? This is what will create a shared intelligence layer, a shared unified understanding that turns fragmented signals into live business context that both employees and agents can use. And now we know through a lot of hard work over the last 2 years that AI ends up failing not because the models aren't smart, it's because the data is junk, right? And in conversation after conversation with customers, I always hear the same thing. We love the AI demos, but our data just isn't ready. We built amazing POCs, we couldn't scale. And the reality is that we're finding that we still have a lot of silos of data, duplicate data, and a real lack of trust, which is why 83% of senior leaders say that their AI adoption would move faster if they had stronger data infrastructure in place. And I think that's why we're all here today. But equally, a lot of organizations are already making the right moves. Top performers have figured this out earlier, and they didn't start with building an agent or just deploying Copilot. They started with the plumbing, modernizing how data is collected, how they connect that data, and how they govern that data. And so the journey really looks like something like this. Like, this is how you become AI ready. It's not one big leap. It's actually a sequence. First of all, you unify your data. Then you make it usable for real-time systems, right? Third, you build intelligence on top of that, right? This is where models learn and where generative AI starts to become really useful. But finally, you turn that insight into action. And this is really important. A lot of people stop when they unify the data and they create dashboards. The end goal is not to create dashboards so that people can get better management information. The end goal is to use that to create systems that can respond, but also take action. And we know that most organizations don't start here, right? They start somewhere in the midst of this really messy ecosystem of systems, APIs, applications, right? And so it's really hard to create a clean blueprint. And so what we're advocating for and what we're really helping organizations do with the Microsoft platform is really accelerate value creation with what we call a modern data platform, right? And it doesn't mean more tools. It actually means reducing friction. And the way that we do that is through advocating for a single data foundation, right? Many businesses are still working with a lot of fragmented, siloed environments. And so they usually start with, how can I build a unified data platform? And at the core of this is the concept of really driving end-to-end visibility, but also bringing it into one place so that you can drive governance over that data. And the finish line is looking something a little bit more like this, right? This is a unified intelligent data estate. I purposely chose this because there isn't any Microsoft products or logos on here. This is something that we believe is applicable from a real technology agnostic perspective. The idea is that this isn't a single tool. Okay, it's not about ripping everything out that you have and having one technology stack vertically integrated across your entire business, because frankly, anyone who would suggest that simply is not in touch with reality. And we know that to be true, working with thousands of organizations. The idea of this estate is for you to unify your data, right? And then have it in an open, governed, and trusted environment. What do I mean by open? When we're thinking about data formats, we advocate for open standards of data. A lot of the times you would have bought data platforms that have proprietary data formats, makes it really hard for you to integrate it with other systems, to transform that data through machine learning processes. And so we believe that the future is all about having open data standards like Delta Parquet, Iceberg, But then also that estate allows you to govern that data because it's built on open standards. So you can actually set controls over who can see what, who can change what, and what systems get to use that information. And so what this is really a lakehouse storage foundation, right? So lakehouse is a recent concept around how you store data. But what's really interesting about it is that it allows you to bring in data and databases that you might have sitting in different clouds, on premise, right? And you do that without having to do any extraction, transformation, and reloading of the data. So the tools that we are seeing customers use nowadays, they have the capabilities of what we call shortcuts and mirroring, which allows you to access data regardless of where it is, and then govern that data from this one unified estate. And so this is the end goal. Bringing all of this together, it really ladders up into these 4 outcomes. Unify your data, make it AI ready, and then empower everyone in the organization with analytics and insights. And then finally, there's no trade-offs, no either or. It's really around being able to seamlessly govern and protect that data so that you can drive AI innovation. So that's all I had time for today. I just wanted to set the context before we look into a little bit more detail around how to get started on that journey. So with that, I'll stop sharing and I'll hand over.
Thanks, Enrique, for that insight into, I guess all things data and AI, and obviously some of the key sort of drivers behind it. I'm just going to reshare the presentation now, and we'll then start with my section. Brilliant. So today I wanted to sort of give you a bit of an insight as to some of the drivers that we're seeing for data strategy at Transparity and across our customer base, and be no surprise that a lot of them sort of align with what Enrique's just shared in terms of that sort of data unification being that main priority. And I also want to go into our approach to data strategy as well. There's lots of schools of thought out there when it comes to data strategy, so we've cherry picked from the best of the bunch and really sort of formulated our own Transparity approach to data strategy. And then also wanted to give you a bit of an insight as to what comes after formulating a data strategy as well. What sort of technology could we be using, and obviously what are some of the benefits and outcomes that will potentially be sort of reaping from a data strategy based implementation approach. So again, like I said, this goes without saying in terms of that sort of data unification is that top priority that we're seeing across every organization, regardless of industry, that I need my data in one central location. That single source of truth approach is the real sort of common driver that we see across every organization that wants to either modernize their data estate or actually is taking a step further back and going, right, actually we need a data strategy before we go and execute technically. And often that's to the backdrop of AI. Obviously, the sort of old IT adage of garbage in, garbage out, even with the advent of AI, is still really, really appropriate. Obviously, AI is only ever going to be as good as the data that it's founded on. And often we come across customers and organizations that have got siloed data around the organization, that sort of complex, organically evolved data estate that doesn't necessarily lend itself to traditional reporting and insights, but also the more sort of advanced analytics, and obviously then the real sort of future forward looking AI side of things as well. I think some of those stats down on the right hand side really sort of paint a line in terms of that sort of 1 in 5 companies are really classing themselves as excelling in maximizing their data. Every organization is producing more and more data. More and more systems are being involved where they've got key sort of core data repositories that really need to be brought together, unified, so that you can then really start to maximize the value out of them. So we typically, across our customer, again, this is regardless of industry and sort of size and scale of customer as well. This is typically the starting line that we start to approach even before starting to formulate a data strategy, and it's that sort of complex, organically evolved data estate. So over time, there was a sort of, I guess, a mantra and a sort of school of thought within IT and wider technical teams that actually going to provision best of breed, sort of off the shelf systems was the approach to take. And actually, that sort of really amplified some of the challenges that we're seeing now, where maybe system A doesn't talk to system B naturally, and actually the two data sets have got parallels and real sort of power in being joined up together, but the systems just don't allow that today. And inevitably that leads to people taking copies of that data from those systems. So, okay, system A and system B doesn't talk together. I'm going to go and take a copy of that data and smash it together in a tool like Excel, which, look, Excel, it has its uses, but ultimately when you're starting to use it as a sort of a key decision tool, to both acquire and transform and manipulate your data, that's when we then start to have challenges. That's when sort of copies of data start to pop up around the organization, and that's really sort of, like I said, amplified by that limited interoperability, which again, that sort of notion of buying best of breed off the shelf solutions that didn't naturally talk to each other, that's what's caused some of those challenges in the past. Obviously we're now seeing a bit of more of a shift and a focus to how do I start to centralize towards maybe platforms that do naturally talk to each other. So obviously Microsoft is a great example there. The number of tools that natively talk to each other start to unblock some of those challenges. But as soon as you've got people taking copies of those data, sharing them in Excel, somebody shares in Excel, they take their own version of it, they put their own twist and filters on it, and then before you know it, you've got several different answers that are supposedly coming from the same data source. You then start to expose yourself more to the risk of data exposure as well. The more and more it's shared, the less governance and security controls you've got around it. That starts to become a real risk to the organization. And ultimately, vendor sprawl is really what has been the ultimate result of some of those challenges above as well. That sort of best of breed approach, actually, whilst it was great because that solution might have been of best in its class in terms of people and HR data or an ERP or a CRM, whatever it might be, ultimately it's then led to further data challenges downstream. So what does a good data strategy look like? So we know why we're doing it. Data unification is key. You maybe want to approach AI and know that your data is not in a situation today. Maybe you're not even looking as far forward as AI today. Maybe it's you can't get basic reports and dashboards out of your data, and you appreciate that if we run at this technically, you try to implement a new platform, you're potentially just moving the challenge and the issue across. That actually you need a more rounded data strategy in order to then be able to approach this technically in the right way. So what does a robust strategy look like? And I think it goes without saying that a strategy should be tailored towards an organization. And I'm sure there's some people on the call going, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. And whilst it is obvious, where we've seen strategies fail in the past is when they've got too much of a technical lens to them. Often IT are lumbered with the sort of the responsibility for owning data, when in reality they own maybe the platform and the infrastructure that platform lives on, and ultimately the tool that data lives within. But actually, they're not the end users. They're not technically the owners of that data. So our approach at Transparity is to go down to the SME level. So going to talk to individuals that are using the data on a day-to-day basis. So that could be across your finance department, procurement, people, customer, whatever it might be, whatever functions you've got within your business where data is being used today. That's ultimately how Transparity approaches their data strategy. Go and talk to those individuals in a workshop setting to really understand how is data used today, and that really then helps us tailor towards the organization. Ultimately, we want to deliver a strategy that has got everybody's fingerprints across it, because ultimately if we go and deliver a strategy that's very much technically and IT led, people won't recognize it. They won't understand how it starts to address their challenges that they've got today with data. It's it's a technical or an IT incentive. I don't really get how that impacts me. But involving them early at that sort of workshop and discovery phase as part of the data strategy piece is key, because like I said, they can see their fingerprints when it's played back to them to go, right, okay, I can now see how this data strategy starts to address some of the challenges that I've got. The checklist down the right hand side is what we try to adhere to when we're creating a data strategy. So we signpost these early on because some of these can get lost in the mix. It's very easy to focus on where data doesn't work today and the challenges and how do we solve those. And actually you can start to solutionize way too early that actually we want to collate where the challenges are. Let's not even think about technology or approach yet. Let's collate where we are, where are the challenges, where are the opportunities, and then we can start to look at that sort of more design and how do we leverage technology to go and fulfill the data strategy. But ultimately, we like to signpost the likes of governance and security on there because they're often overlooked, and obviously they're critical to being there from day zero. Without governance and security, you run the risk of having a all singing, all dancing data strategy, resulting in a perfect data platform ready for AI solutions to be leveraged on top of it. But a data breach or a security incident can take you back to square zero pretty quickly. So making sure that security and governance is there from day zero and not an afterthought when actually the platform has already grown legs and is being used by the organization. Typically, the workshops will largely focus on, obviously, like I said, where the challenges are, which are usually around data quality and integrity. Have you got tooling issues today? Actually, is the adoption of a tool like Dynamics, for example, is that widely accepted within the organization? Is that being used to its full capability? Are there maybe some ailing systems that actually, due to their age and their technologies, they don't inherently allow you to talk to them from a data perspective? Part of the strategy is about uncovering all of those challenges. So it won't just be data challenges that we uncover, it's also potentially tooling and system challenges that we uncover as well, because no matter the quality of the data going into the system, if we can't naturally talk to it and get data from it, again, we're at a bit of an impasse, and people will then find workarounds, which inevitably then leads to some of those challenges that we discussed earlier. Data integration and accessibility. We quickly see data platforms becoming integration platforms as well. So once you've collated all of your data together, you might be feeding it off and allowing an AI solution to look at it. You might have traditional reporting and dashboards in a tool like Power BI, but actually you might have other third-party tooling and systems that need that data as a feed. So we quickly start to see data platforms becoming integration ones as well. And then we start to look at more towards the future as well. What are the future use cases for this data? Advanced analytics and data science. Often people can struggle to look past the challenges today. Well, look, I can't even get my hands on the data today. So how can I even think about how we could leverage machine learning, data science, and AI on top of it? So part of that data strategy workshop and an approach is very much about what is that future state? Where do people want to get to? Sort of ignore the challenges today; those will be fixed in due time. Where do you want to be moving forward in the future? And I think a real key part of this is that collaboration and communication bit as well. So, like I said, where we see where we see data strategies fail is when they've got too much of an IT or a technical lens, or maybe they've got a focus on a functional area that is screaming the loudest for data today. When they're narrow focused like that, typically that's where we then start to see that sort of breakdown in collaboration and buy-in from the rest of the organization. So as I said earlier, there's lots of schools of thought around data strategy and how you approach it. So like I said, we don't lean into one school of thought in terms of we adhere to a particular framework. We've effectively cherry picked over a number of years as to what makes for the best data strategy, and that's through execution against our customers. But typically, like I said, our strategy is workshop led and based. So talking to the individuals on the ground, we won't get enough information or the clarity of information without talking to the individuals using the data today. But typically our workshops and approach covers these sort of 4 core pillars of a strategy. So unsurprisingly, as part of a data strategy, data is the first core pillar. So what are systems being used today? And again, we often start with technical and data teams and go, right, tell us what data sources are in play today, and they'll uncover 90% of them. But lo and behold, we will uncover additional data sources from around the business as well. You'd be amazed as to how many important processes and data sets live in Excel documents that are on people's desktops today. So yeah, where are the sources? What data is being used, and also how are you governing and securing that as well? Is that even a consideration today? Technology, we try to keep out of those sort of initial workshop stages with sort of subject matter experts, because ultimately we don't want to solutionize on the fly. We don't want to sort of temper people's expectations based on, well, we think the technology can or can't deliver that today. So those workshops are all about discovering really what are people's ambitions with data today, no matter how lofty they are. let's forget whether it's technically possible. That's something for obviously internal technical teams, but also Transparity as a partner to work out as part of the sort of the strategy roadmap. But ultimately, that's what's in use today, where can we use it to better effect? Because obviously this isn't always just a shopping list of expensive new systems. It's about using what you've got today in a better way. Is there a platform that exists today? What is that? Is that a more traditional SQL data warehouse? Is that fulfilling requirements today? What does that look like if we were to modernize it in maybe a tooling like Fabric or Databricks as an example? And also, have you got the right skill sets within the teams as well? Are you able to then leverage, if a new platform was to come along, what sort of training is required in order to make sure that ultimately the existing team are also the owners of that new platform? As well. We don't want the strategy to be seen as this is replacing people or moving people away from their specialist areas. It's more about making sure that there's clear sort of career progression for them as well as we start to introduce new technology potentially. The people pillar is arguably the most important pillar of the data strategy, hence why we take the workshop-driven approach. Like I said, we want individuals to see their fingerprints across the strategy that ultimately we deliver out of the back of this process. So those key stakeholders, those data SMEs and owners from around the organization, they may not be deemed data owners in the traditional sense, but they may be key to a data process today. We want to talk to them, and that's really how expansive this data strategy can be. This could be very tightly scoped into certain individuals, or actually, look, this could be much wider and involve a number of individuals. So we have data strategies that range from 9 to 10 days in effort all the way up to 40 or 50 days in effort. It all depends on how many stakeholders are at play and obviously how diverse your data estate is today. Obviously, the delivery team as well, making sure that if you have got incumbent data teams and skills, we want to make sure those guys are on board as well. Again, we don't want this strategy to come across as prescribed in terms of this is the route forward, this is the route we're taking. We need to make sure that people are on board and along for the ride on this one as well. Third parties may even come into play in this as well. It may be that one of your core data sources is hosted by a third party. How do we interact and get more from them today? And also group structure and organizational structure is key as well. Where are there opportunities to potentially consolidate data resources? Maybe you've got bespoke analysts in certain functions and areas. How do we start to make those talk to each other? And maybe does that come through centralization as an example? All of those sorts of things are the bits that we want to discuss at a workshop level, but also then factor into the strategy roadmap as we start to build it out. And then finally, the workshops and the sort of the approach we take is about uncovering requirements. It's all great that we go and deliver a high level strategy at the end of this where we go, right, you should go and do data governance and security. And you go, well, thank you very much. We already knew that. That was a given. But actually, as part of that workshopping and discovery process, we can start to bring life to, well, actually, you've got 5 use cases across these different areas that are all crying out for data security, data governance, automation, some additional reporting or insights, whatever the requirements might be. And we can start to plot those against not only a data strategy roadmap, but also a technical delivery roadmap that comes off the back of it as well. Because ultimately, that's where we want to position organizations, that at the end of this, you've got a clear strategy. This is how we're going to tackle and maximize the value in our data, but also how do we even start to go and do that from a technical point of view? What we don't want to do is deliver the strategy and then go, right, okay, no real clue on how to go and technically execute against this. That's really where the requirement gathering from the workshop process comes into play. As part of the initial sort of data strategy engagement, we also like to plot organizations against a maturity side of things as well. Ultimately, because it gives us a line in the sand. Where are we today from a data maturity point of view? And again, there's lots of schools of thought around maturity levels and models and what you should list them as. Again, we've sort of cherry picked from various different ones to come up with our Transparity approach, but it's a simple 4-level approach, starting off on ad hoc, where siloed data, unstructured data, with no real sort of formal process or governance around it. Organized, which is where we find most customers, they start to have that basic governance and policies in place. There might be some limited data automation with an existing data platform or data warehouse. Optimized is often the sort of place that we're first aiming for within the strategy and the delivery of it, starting to become that more sort of data-driven culture and organization. How do we effectively make decisions that are that are backed by clear and consistent and quality data. And then you start to go into that advanced analytics. So typically reporting and dashboards might be looking back, what has happened, how do we start looking forward, how do we start forecasting and predicting off some of our data. And then you've got the panacea, the ultimate sort of goal where you want to reach, that transformational stage. How do we see data as a strategic asset? That really is a differentiator between us and our competitors in whatever industry we're in. How do we use data differently? How do we drive it to make decisions and ultimately give us a competitive advantage over our competitors? But also, how do we start to then leverage it for AI as well, which obviously is a big key driver to the data strategies that we see. So at the back end of the data strategy engagement, we will plot the organization. And when I say organization, it could be functional areas that we've spoken to, because again, you start to see a mixture in terms of maturity across the organization. So typically finance are often more mature from a data perspective, given they're based in data and numbers as part of their day job. But ultimately, we then might see other areas that are lagging behind that might be a priority for the strategy to address. So again, plotting on the maturity model allows us to go, right, we think these areas are a priority for the strategy. Maybe these areas can be left until later because maybe they're further along in the journey or they're more mature from a data perspective. But also on the flip side, it might be that we identify an area that is ahead and actually they're a really good candidate to go and work out a blueprint to go and really execute this strategy against, get it right for this area that we know is a little bit more mature than others, and then we can go and replicate that across the other functional areas as well. And as Henrique said, this obviously isn't an overnight thing. This is definitely a journey, and this is typically the sort of journey that we see. So down in the bottom left hand corner, formulating a strategy. You could go off and run at this technically and try to execute technically and go, right, something like Fabric or Databricks is going to fix this for me. When in reality, a data strategy will uncover, like I said, tooling and system issues, but also some softer side of data as well. Data ownership and responsibilities. Data literacy is another big thing that necessarily a technical tool won't go and fix. So typically we then start with obviously formulating a data strategy, moving on to standing up a data platform, because that is ultimately the tool that's going to go and unify that data, which is really the key sort of priority to then go and unlock the value from reports and AIs solutions downstream. That then starts to unlock predictive analytics, that sort of traditional looking back reporting side of things. But then we can start to look at integration as well. Like I said, data platforms quickly grow into integration platforms as well. And then we move on to that AI piece. Where can we start to leverage our data? We know it's unified, we know it's clean, quality data. How can we start to leverage AI solutions on top? In reality, this looks very sequential, but actually in practice, it then starts to happen in parallel. So you might stand the data platform up, that starts to then unlock analytic capabilities, but also we then start to uncover sort of ring-fenced AI use cases as well, that maybe you don't need an all singing, all dancing data platform in order to start leveraging a chatbot on policy documents, for example, is another real sort of key ring-fenced use case that we see within the AI space. So in reality, lots of these happen in parallel, because ultimately we know organizations won't stand still for 12 months while we formulate the perfect strategy and build the building blocks in order to go and execute against it. So what can this look like from a technical point of view? So again, obviously we're not trying to do a hard sell on a technical point of view today, because ultimately a strategy could uncover all sorts of technical requirements and solutions that we might need to leverage. But this is typically what we see from a data platform perspective, being obviously transparency, its alignment with Microsoft. Inevitably that could be in tooling like Fabric and or Databricks, depending on the requirements. But typically it's those data sources uncovered in the strategy, those are on the left-hand side. We then start to ingest them using tooling like Fabric or Databricks that then starts to fulfill some of that almost enterprise data view. So those functional areas we spoke to in the strategy, HR, operations, finance, for example, how do we start to fulfill some of their requirements and use cases that were uncovered as part of the data strategy? That then leads on to the right-hand side of things. How do we then start to leverage that tooling for classic business intelligence, that reporting layer? How do we then start to expand into maybe data science and ML And then also then how do we then start to leverage that from an AI point of view? But the idea being that you've got that centralized, unified data platform that obviously then can allow you to comfortably explore in a secured and governed way that data that you've managed to collate into that single source of truth. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight into why data strategy, what are the key drivers behind it, that data unification piece, how do we approach it, what is the transparency approach, that 4 core pillar workshop driven approach, what are the key sort of metrics and outputs off the back of it, that data strategy roadmap followed by the technical delivery roadmap, alongside also a data maturity assessment and where are we today, so we can start to monitor how we move up at that maturity scale as we progress. And ultimately that this is a journey. This isn't a one and done thing that you've done your strategy, you go and deliver a data platform and right, we can sit back and relax. This is an ongoing investment and resourcing piece as well. I'm now going to hand over to Jordan from Aster to bring to life really the drivers behind their data strategy journey and obviously where they are today with that journey. Over to you, Jordan.
Thank you, Luke. Afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to quickly take control of the slides. If I can remember how to, a little bit at the top. Okay. So Jordan, Aster's Director of Strategy and Insight, as Luke described. And as of October, I'm Aster's operational lead, responsible for overseeing the creation and implementation of a data strategy. I'll just say a few things about Aster. I appreciate we've probably got a diverse audience. So Aster is a regulated not-for-profit social landlord. We own and manage over 37,000 homes across the south of England and London. Commonly, you'd hear our type of business referred to as a housing association. Alongside our core housing management and repairs and maintenance functions, we develop around about 1,000 new homes each year, and we also operate a number of care homes. And we are an amalgam of many individual housing associations dating back to 1990. Most recently, over the past 5 or 6 years, we've acquired 3 smaller housing associations and welcomed those into the group, and they've contributed to the structure that you can see on the slide. In addition to several housing landlords, our structure also includes non-charitable entities that are linked to our maintenance and development activities. We have 2 registered charities in the group at present, and we also have several joint venture partnerships who we develop some of our larger schemes with. And as a consequence, I suppose, of our scale and structure, we are awash with data across 4 key domains. So we have our customers, and we hold data currently on over 150,000 customers. We have our assets, so over 40,000 in total when we include our non-social housing assets. Our people, we currently employ over 2,000. And finance, we're quite a significant business in terms of scale within our sector. So we have an annual turnover of around about 350 million. We have drawn debt in excess of 1.4 billion, and the sort of total value of our assets is in the region of 2.5 billion. So in terms of our data position, well, I think it's fair to say, while we are definitely data heavy, we're probably not so much data rich at present. And as a legacy, I think, of how the business has come together, particularly with that recent inorganic growth that we've experienced, we've seen a proliferation of data and systems, and we've not yet achieved full integration across those areas, in part, candidly, driven by the absence of a clear strategic direction when it comes to data and to an extent technology, and hence the reference on the slide to sort of no single version of the truth that I think came through Luke's piece. We have data duplicated across multiple systems, often providing the same information but with a slightly different answer, which necessitates extensive reconciliation and a requirement across many of our business functions to rely on manual processes and workarounds to achieve confidence in the data that we are reporting. it's a challenge that's by no means unique to Asta, and certainly, within our sector, we're not an outlier. But it certainly feels that we're approaching a point where we could start to fall behind if we don't start taking substantive action. Now, we have recently identified for ourselves what our sort of internal data operating model looks like for the group, but it's nascent as of today, and we've not yet established that overarching data strategy that brings the component parts of our operating model together. We also need to proactively strengthen our control environment. So at present, we don't have, for example, a clearly defined approach to data governance. We don't have adopted data standards or data policies. And consequently, concepts of data ownership, data stewardship, are embryonic at best, and certainly not embedded across the organization. And without some of those stronger controls, it also means that we may not be ingesting new data. For example, those 1,000 new homes that we're bringing into the organisation every year, as effectively as we should, which then risks compounding data quality issues down the track. And we also need to strengthen controls around our reporting. So within our Power BI environment at present, we have over 600 data sets and at last count over 900 dashboards with mixed visibility and limited change control. Now, we do have positive self-awareness of our data position, and we've been under no illusions, I don't think, in respect of our relatively low maturity. I've just noticed as well, sorry, I should have maybe clicked one more time. There you go. So caught that just in time. So that confirms where we currently are in terms of Transparity's maturity model. But being able to identify areas in which we need to strengthen is one thing. I think establishing a clear, joined up and prioritised plan of action to address those has proved to be quite another. And what action we do take at present tends to be probably more tactical and reactive. A good example would be, our current utilisation of the sort of Fabric and Purview platforms, which they've come to us as part of our sort of changes in the Microsoft suite. But today, we're still really just tinkering in a sort of non-strategic and siloed way. And there's certainly not present a defined plan for how we're going to achieve sort of systematic adoption across those platforms. It's all a little bit ad hoc. To a large degree, our current position is a consequence of, I suppose, multifaceted resource challenges that, are certainly as of today inhibiting our approach to drive improvement on our own. That includes the quantum of resource and therefore probably potential gaps in some of our skills and capabilities, but also I think clarity around roles and responsibilities across the organisation, and particularly where sort of our data and technology teams sort of collide. And left unaddressed, this could manifest itself in a misalignment with where our board is in terms of our approved risk appetite, which states quite clearly that we will not tolerate a lack of integrity in the data as it relates to our critical customer asset, finance and people data sets. And this is at a time when data is an area of growing risk to our business in our sector. Regulation is changing. There are shifting expectations that are being enshrined in law, particularly on the back of major events like Grenfell and the tragic passing of Arab Ishaq. And good data is critical to how we can remain compliant as a business in that tightening regulatory and legislative environment. But of course, not just about risk. For us, it's also opportunity, and you'll note the final point in respect of insight and our ability to make true data-led decisions, and of course harness the power of AI, which I think both Henrik and Luke have spoken to. I would say across all levels in our organisation, right from the boards down, people are clamoring to explore how data and our AI can be used to improve services and drive efficiency. Our challenge is to establish the foundations for doing that in a safe and effective way. So kind of leads nicely, I think, into our engagement with Transparency. We do need help. For anyone who doesn't know, that's a lovely picture of El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. And because for me, whenever I think about this, it's the scale of the challenge, and it feels a little bit like we're at the foot of this, vast cliff face, and you're thinking, how do we gain a foothold? So, as I've already suggested, we've travelled as an organisation a positive distance towards understanding our position. But it was clear to me, I think, upon taking responsibility for establishing Asta's data strategy, that we needed some support. We needed some support to deepen and crystallise that understanding, and crucially translate it into that clear, prioritised plan of action at an enterprise level, sitting across all elements of the data operating model, and anchored by a strategy that sets that direction and allows for appropriately sequenced and appropriately coordinated activity across our business. And it was around this time, I guess October, November time, that I was introduced to Transparency. Now, they've worked with Asta's technology teams for the past 6 or so years, so they were a known quantity to us. But nonetheless, one of my closest colleagues at Asta is our director of procurement, so I tested the market. But Transparency's data strategy offer aligned really well with our requirements, and Luke and the team demonstrated, were able to play back to us a really clear understanding of, where we were or where we perceived ourselves to be and what we were seeking to achieve. So specifically, we commissioned Transparency to undertake kind of a data maturity assessment, really, but with 3 primary objectives. One was that articulation of, Asta's current data position within their maturity framework. 2 was that in doing so, to identify the key themes that should drive the creation of our data strategy. And then 3, to ensure that as an organisation, we move beyond where we've been before, working with us to create a roadmap for how we move forward in a structured way. So to deliver those objectives, Transparency, very much in the way that Luke described, ran, I think in the end it was around 16 workshops with us that spanned all key areas of our business, and at different levels. So, for example, we did a session with our notional, I say notional because we haven't got to that sort of data ownership definition, but our notional owner of our asset data. Luke then proceeded to engage first with a cohort of wider leaders for whom our asset data is sort of critical to their roles, and then met with a cross-section of more operational colleagues, who live and breathe our asset data sort of day in, day out. And that approach was replicated across all 4 of our critical data domains. And there were also workshops that were tailored more for our sort of technical colleagues across data and technology to ensure that, their perspectives were brought in. And that the breadth and depth of this engagement, I think, enabled Luke to draw a really rich picture of our current position. Absolutely, really clear identification of key themes, many of which were sort of common across all domains. And, Luke was able to start to compile a list of use cases that could be carried into that future delivery plan. And we've got a cracking report from Luke that I think is hot off the press this week, or certainly the final version of it is. Because of the volume of workshops, it's a long report. So one of my colleagues started to pump it into Copilot to sort of, say, in a nutshell, what does this tell me? And I thought the answer was just, on the money. It said, Asta doesn't have a data problem. It has an ownership, structure, and process problem that manifests itself as a data problem. And furthermore, technology, including the likes of, Fabric and Purview and these platforms that we're starting to just dabble with, they're not a blocker. It's the lack of consistent definitions, ownership, and governance that is sort of holding us where we are. So we successfully played the outputs of the maturity assessment back to our executive team and my wider senior leadership team colleagues last Monday. And brilliant session attended by Steve and Luke and their colleague Jodie. This confirmed for that audience where we sit on Transparity's maturity model. So at the moment we're somewhere between the 0 and the 1, and it introduced certainly a conceptual level what our options are. So in terms of that future roadmap, at one end of the spectrum, do nothing, through to full-scale transformation, which we were sort of badging as gold, and I guess is what gets you closer to 3 on their maturity model. And what this did, and the way we presented it, it enabled really that group of senior leaders to sort of provide a bit of a strategic steer, which for us right now was very much in favour of moving towards silver. Okay, so strategic investment in our data that resourced appropriately shifts us towards level 2 on the maturity model, towards that data-driven culture that Luke described, and delivers a far more structured control environment, clearly defined data governance, improved data quality, fewer versions of the truth, reduced manual reporting for our colleagues, and starts to pave the way for certainly some ring-fenced, lower risk automation and AI. That pretty much brings us up to date. So the third objective around the sort of roadmap and the future plan, that's underway now. So we are working together to build a sort of fully scoped and resource delivery plan that sets us on the path towards that optimized maturity state over the coming 1 to 2 years. So that's me, and I think I'm passing back to you, Luke.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jordan. And I really appreciate you bringing to life some of the challenges that you uncovered in the data strategy program and process, and hopefully that also rings true with some of the audience on today's call as well. So if you're sitting there thinking, actually, we're in a very similar situation, or actually a lot of this rings true to where we are today, in terms of next steps, if you were to be interested in engaging with Transparity on the data strategy on a work stream, is we offer a data strategy workshop. So these are run at pre-sales, so no commitment from a cost point of view, but it's a sort of the 3-part workshop approach. So current state, where are you today? What does your data look like today? So obviously that's not going into the nitty gritty that we'll get into at the workshop stage. This is more about understanding how expansive is your data today, and where are some of those challenges as well. And that's typically led by the sort of technical and data teams internally, before we then start to get into the SME level if we were to go forward with a strategy engagement. Second sort of phase and part of the workshop process is the future state as well. So understanding actually how ready is the organization for data ownership and stewardship, like Jordan was talking about earlier. Is there the notion of it, or actually is this going to be something new? Obviously, looking at that sort of collective wins as well, data unification, that single source of truth. What are we trying to get out of this data strategy, and what is the end goal? Is AI a big driver, as an example, for that future state? How do we get to that data-driven culture? How do we move on that data maturity side of things as well? And understanding your ambition as well. It may be that you're on level 0 or level 1 today, and actually, getting towards optimized is enough, that actually we don't want to shoot for the stars on that transformational just yet. Maybe that's a longer piece and a bigger investment piece that needs more consideration. Obviously, data governance and security, like we're saying, is key to any strategy. So calling that out today. What tooling are you using? Have you got dedicated security and governance teams internally, or is this going to be something new to your organization? And then also identifying those sort of key drivers and priority use cases. So asset data being so key and critical to Asta today. That was a natural place for us to start on our journey with Asta and Jordan and the team, because ultimately that's the lifeblood of their organization today. So it made sense to start there. You may have similar data sets within your organizations today as well. And then the final part of the workshop process is about helping really build that business case. We appreciate that getting investment in new technology, but also, I guess, what are softer side of things. These aren't going to result in technical delivery as such, not from the get-go at least anyway, can require some some building of a business case and really sort of selling back to execs and senior leaders. So we will help build out that success criteria. What does a data strategy ultimately deliver for the organization? That actionable insights driven by data, increasing that data maturity piece, obviously increasing levels of data literacy as well across the organization. You may have pockets, like we were saying earlier, of really good literacy and then obviously not so great literacy across other teams that aren't maybe as data reliant. How do we get that consistent across the field? That robust data governance and security, this is often an eye opener for those decision makers that actually, you know what, if we don't do something better with our data today from a security and governance point of view, we might be exposed to more risk than we want to be. Also, AI readiness, that's a big driver that we're seeing from sort of execs and senior levels, that how do we use AI to obviously find automation and find efficiencies and optimizations as well. And also we can then start to discuss how we leverage Microsoft funding as well. So as a Microsoft partner, we can access certain funding pots from a Fabric and Databricks point of view, but also from a data security point of view as well. So we'll work with you. We've got a dedicated partner team where we can work out what funding we can access on your behalf. And ultimately, what is the ROI? Are there some obvious opportunities within the organization today that a strategy could start to address that ultimately saves time and saves money for the organization? So yeah, if you're interested in a sort of exploratory data strategy workshop where we can start to flesh out how expansive and what would a data strategy look like for your organization, then yeah, please do reach out. Right, I think we're just about on time, so I'm going to hand over to Steve to guide us through the last sort of Q&A section.
Thank you, Luke. Well done for keeping on time. It's impressive. We just take control. As Luke said, just a section at the end really for any Q&A. So please, if anyone wanted to ask any questions, feel free to come off mute. We can ask some questions. We'll keep the chat open for a little bit afterwards if people wanted to put it in the chat. But any questions, please ask away. Sounds like everyone's done a great job presenting, preempting everyone's questions. As a few people said yes to a follow-up workshops, that's great. We'll pick those up afterwards. And of course, if anybody wanted any sort of questions afterwards, any topics, we can set up some calls as well with Luke and the team to answer those. Otherwise, just a final thank you to everyone joining today. I hope you found the session useful and look forward to keeping in touch.